सभी दोस्तों का आज के इस खास प्रोग्राम में स्वागत है। दोस्तों, ये प्रोग्राम अंग्रेजी भाषा में होगा, वो इसलिए क्योंकि हमारे जो मेहमान हैं, उनका ताल्लुक आंध्र प्रदेश से है और वो इतनी अच्छी हिंदी बोल नहीं सकते, लेकिन उनके पास बहुत ही दिलचस्प प्रेज़ेंटेशन है, जो वो देना चाहते हैं हम सबको, इंसानों की बेहतरी के लिए, ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट और वेल-बीइंग के लिए। तो आप सबसे गुजारिश है कि हमारा साथ आप दें। पहले प्रेज़ेंटेशन होगी, उसके बाद हम जो है सवाल-जवाब का सिलसिला शुरू करेंगे। Hello and a very warm welcome to all the viewers. Today we have a very interesting session lined up for you. Our guests are from Andhra Pradesh and they are going to talk about human well-being and development. Let us welcome one by one all of them. We have Krishna Pagadala ji. Krishna ji, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We also have Jaya Shankar ji in the background. He is going to help us with the presentation, the slideshow that you are going to see in a while. Welcome to the show, Jaya Shankar ji.
Hi, thank you.
We also have Professor Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed. Professor Sahab, welcome to the show as well.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this discussion because when Krishna Pagadala ji got in touch with me and said he had some very original ideas about the role of education in development, I was definitely intrigued. And I think this is going to be a very interesting, fruitful contribution. So, very exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. So the surprise is that we have not seen the presentation. It is our first time as well. We have no idea what Krishna ji and Jai Shankar ji are going to present to us.
The message of my presentation here is that education is fundamental to human well-being, and people think it is income and economic growth. The argument I'm making here is that education is fundamental to human well-being and income is not fundamental. It is not so important. Next slide, please. So let's take a long view of history and of human history. Over the long human history from the invention of agriculture, which is around 10,000 plus years ago, what we see is that women had 6 children on average, and 4 of them died and did not reach adulthood. Right, so that is why population was fairly stable. And how did the children die? They died mostly because of war, famine, childhood infectious disease. And so that has been a long history. And in the modern era, what is happening is women have started having less number of kids, and the number of kids actually started that are dying also has reduced quite a bit. So in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, slowly there's a progression to having less kids. So you can see that the number of kids has reduced to 5, and the deaths have reduced to 1 out of 5. So more kids are surviving. So that is the reason for the population growth also. What we are coming up right now is a new balance where every woman in the world is having on average 2 kids. It is not complete everywhere in the world, but it is going in that direction. Basically we have a new balance where the population will become stable after in 30-40 years the world population will become stable. These are actually the having 2 kids per woman is actually true both for Bangladesh in the Indian subcontinent context, both for Bangladesh and for India. Pakistan is on its way there. I think it has 3 kids per woman right now, but it is on its way there. It has not fully finished. This is called a demographic transition. So this is a long history of the world. Next slide, please. Yeah. So here what we see is that there are 5 countries that I'm going to talk about again and again, which is South Korea, Argentina, China, India, and Pakistan, for comparison, for international comparison, and to see what lessons we can learn from the global perspective, right? So what we see is that in 1960, this was the y-axis is women who have completed percentage of women who have completed 6 years of schooling in the age group 20 to 24, young women basically, and x-axis is 1962 to current date. What we can see is that in 1960, India and Pakistan had very low rates of schooling for girls and women, right? And with time, every country has improved. But what I want to focus on is South Korea, and then Argentina and China. So they have already high levels of schooling, and then they have improved. I also want to look at the crossover between Argentina and China. So Argentina was ahead of China, but it actually crossed. It was actually crossed by China. With respect to India and Pakistan, India has always been a little bit ahead, and it has continued to stay ahead. Next slide, please. So this is actually 9 years of schooling. It is the same as countries, but with 9 years of schooling. So percentage of women who have completed 9 years of schooling. So if we can look at a much greater diversity, right? So Korea had only 40% of its women going to finishing 9 years in 1960, but by 1990, almost 100% started going to finishing 9 years of schooling. And then we can also see China has actually outpaced Argentina totally, and it has outpaced it in 1970 itself. And then Argentina has lagged behind China, although it was almost on par. And then India and Pakistan actually are even behind. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now, here we are looking at 12 years of education. In India, this is called pre-PUC, pre-college, right? The last year before you go to college. How many finish that class or grade? So here again, we are looking at women age 20 to 24 and 12 years of schooling. So again, the same countries. And here we can see South Korea, which had only less than 20%, go all the way up to 80%, 90% finishing 12 years of education, which is in the US, it's called high school education. Uh, and we can see Argentina, China, India, and Pakistan actually lagging behind. And China is an interesting point because China actually beat out Argentina quite a bit for 9 years of schooling, but not for 12 years of schooling. So this is something interesting to watch. This is actually social policy of the country of China and the country of each countries. But it is interesting to see the policy differences and how they impact the schooling. Next slide, please. Oh, let's go back to the previous slide. So Arvind ji, I want to make it a little bit interactive here. If you can bring back Ishtiaq ji also. What do you think, Arvind ji, by looking at these three graphs, what do you think who is leading in 1960 in terms of income, who is behind in terms of education, and who is behind in terms of, so basically, I mean, we have seen the education graphs, but I want you to make a guess of who is behind, what is the order for income. So given these three graphs of women's education that we have seen, what is your guess about the income levels of these countries in 1960 and in 2010? What do you think the order of this income of these countries, these particular countries?
Well, certainly looks like that the income has definitely gone up. When you look at the countries like South Korea, Argentina, and China,
I mean, all over
com-
the world, this has been true. All
compared to the other two countries, it's gone at a very fast level.
Okay, but in 1960, which was ahead? Which do you think was ahead, Arvindji?
Okay, in 1960, definitely, which South Korea looks far more ahead
In terms of income.
in terms of income, yes.
And then followed by?
Then followed by Argentina, China, and then goes India, and then Pakistan.
Okay, so let's look at the next slide. So here we can see that Argentina was actually very, very rich compared to the rest of the countries. So it had almost, this is log scale, it had almost an income of $10,000 in 1960. And South Korea was relatively poor. Okay, China, India, and Pakistan, you can say there is, one is ahead, one is behind, but I think overall we can say that they were almost on par. What we can see is that China and South Korea have actually gone far ahead of where they started from over the last 60 years. Okay, and Argentina has flatlined, and India and Pakistan have slowly improved, but not all that much. Okay, so what we can clearly see is that it is not income that drives your education, but rather the reverse. It is education that drives your income, because what we see is fundamentally different in these countries is China has leaped ahead of, and China and South Korea have leaped ahead of sorry, China and South Korea have leaped ahead of of Argentina, because they have invested in education ahead of time when they did not have money. So that is the critical point. You don't need to have money to invest in education, and when you invest in education, education drives your income, right? So basically, education is the fundamental factor.
Yes. May I make a point?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Uh, Coming to the 60s, then Pakistan's income was higher than that of India.
Yes.
So I would like to understand then, uh, I mean, that seems to strengthen your point that high income by itself doesn't drive societies towards development. It has
Right.
to be education.
Right. And we can
So
see that.
in the 60s, Pakistan was ahead in income, but behind India in education. It continues to be behind India in education, and I think that has a multiplying cause.
Right.
So development has also been slower. Would you agree to that?
I totally would agree, Ishtiaq ji. Uh,
Yes.
Professor G, we can see the same from Argentina also, right?
Yes.
We see a stagnation in their living standards as compared to China or South Korea.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So here we can see life expectancy. So here, China had the Great Chinese Famine in 1958. So I don't want to discuss it right now, but if you do look at 1962 starting, it had a steady increase, right? Argentina has slightly fallen behind, and it has almost kept up with South Korea, but South Korea is definitely ahead, right? If you look at India and Pakistan, actually it is reversed. Pakistan, there was a substantial life expectancy gap between Pakistan and India, but this has slowly over the course of time reversed, and this again is due to the investments in education done by India. That is, India has stayed ahead of Pakistan in terms of education, and therefore its life expectancy has gone up more than Pakistan, and it has actually crossed Pakistan. So here again, in terms of well-being, human well-being, we can see that, first, one of the first important things you want to do is you want to live a long life, right? And that India has done better than Pakistan, of course, relatively, because of its investments in education. And this is very clear from this graph. Next slide, please. So this one is children per women. Here we can see the fertility rate. It is also called per fertility rate. How many children does a woman have in her lifetime on average? This is it. So here we can see almost all countries have start with high fertility rates. Argentina is an exception because it was somewhat of a rich country by 1960 itself, but we can see that its fertility rate has not gone down very fast. The reason is because of its lack of investment in education, and we can see India had a slow but steady drop, and Pakistan has lagged behind. China, interestingly, has fallen very fast before 1980. And 1980, I want to mention because 1980 is the year in which the one-child policy was introduced. If you compare it with South Korea, South Korea has also almost the same trajectory, and the difference between China and South Korea is not that much. Although South Korea has no one-child policy, its fertility rate, number of children the women in South Korea are having, is actually lesser than in China. So what I want to say with respect to this part is that the impact of one-child policy on China's population is zero. It was an unnecessary policy. It was a very destructive policy. It was not needed at all. All the propaganda that one-child policy, population control policies of China are widely admired in some parts of the world. All of them are false. It is all pure propaganda that there is any effect on the population of China. The one-child policy had an effect on China's population. The reason is very simple. By 1980, Chinese women were reasonably educated, and we can see that from the previous graphs. And educated women choose to have fewer kids. This is universal. This is true in the US, this is true in Argentina, this is true in Pakistan, this is true anywhere in the world. There are no exceptions. And so that's the children per woman. And next slide, please. Yeah, this is just my pitch for a charity. If you are interested in women's education in India, especially, this is a good charity to help out. And then for $10, they can keep one girl in school for a year. But this is, yeah, this ends my presentation. Thank you so much. So if Arvindji or Ishtiaqji, if you want to look at any of our previous graphs, we can talk over them again, or we can do new graphs if there are any other new countries that you want to see, for example, Bangladesh or United States or Japan.
I was interested in Bangladesh because it seems to be doing better than India and Pakistan. And in before it became independent, it was the poorest part of Pakistan. But even then, I think the education was better.
Right.
But they have gone ahead. Can you bring that graph in? And what about Turkey? These two countries.
Turkey
Should we compare Bangladesh and Pakistan first, sir?
Okay, we can do that.
Let's compare Bangladesh and Pakistan and see how they've panned over the years.
So Jayshankar, let's add Turkey to this list after a few minutes. But first, let's look at 6 years of schooling for Bangladesh here, right? So Bangladesh actually is ahead of Pakistan, and it was also ahead of Pakistan in 1960 for primary education, 6 years of
Exactly.
schooling,
Yeah.
right? But not by all that much. So that is the important thing. It is not by all that much. So if you go to the next slide, we'll get to 9 years of schooling. So here we can see a bunch of countries. So Bangladesh again is actually on par with Pakistan, right? It is not on par with India even. So it kind of is on par with Pakistan for the most part for 9 years of schooling. So let's look at 12 years of schooling. Here it lags Pakistan too.
It's behind Pakistan.
It's behind Pakistan even today.
Hmm.
So one of the differences that we can talk about, Ishtiaqji, is maybe it is also not just education, right? What I'm talking about is secular education. I'm not talking, religious education. So maybe there is a difference because religious education is also counted in Pakistan and maybe it is not counted in Bangladesh. So maybe there are some differences in the data that we don't have full control over. But this is the overall picture, though.
No, I think the overall poverty of Bangladesh was so much that they probably didn't have enough resources to direct to education.
I'm going to strongly disagree with you, Ishtiaqji, because we have seen from the example of Korea. If you look at Korea, the graph right there, right, the speed at which they increase, and they had very little money, and also with Argentina, right? So it has nothing to do with money. And also, this is a good graph to look at, right? If you look at the United States, let's go to the very last graph, Jayshankar. So here is college rates of for women aged 25 to 29 who have finished college, right? So here we can see South Korea way ahead, like almost 70% have gone to college, have finished college. Japan almost 60% have finished college, but whereas the United States, which was ahead in 1960 of every other country, right, has actually stagnated at 30-40%. This is not because of money. These are actually social policy decisions done by the government.
When I said money, I meant social policies because you have to direct resources from one place to another. So money in that sense, the national budget allocations. That's
Yes,
what
I mean, they did not allocate it. They did not give it priority. It is not that they did
That's
not
right.
have money. They did not give it priority. That is why it says
That's right.
social
I
policy.
actually meant they didn't give priority.
Right.
Yeah.
But Ishtiaqji, it has nothing to do with how much money they have. So that is what I'm saying. The poverty of the country has nothing to do with how educated it is. So that is why I want to decouple it, right?
Well, it's your way of looking at it. I would see that there is a connection, but definitely what you are saying has a lot of merit at the same time.
Right.
Correct.
Ishtiaq ji, I'm not disagreeing with you on the short term, right? In a 5-year term, obviously, money is important, how rich your country is. But
And
in
I
the
think,
long term, when you look at it,
mm,
70-year period like we are doing here, it actually, your social policy actually trumps everything else. The amount of money you have in your country, when you started with, is not important at all.
one thing more, I don't think the madrasa schools have so many students really. It's
Okay.
still the regular schools. It's still the regular schools in Pakistan. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, Ishtiaq
Yeah.
ji. So in terms of, I want to talk in terms of states of India, we also see I don't have the data to present like a graph, but we see a lot of diversity in terms of educational achievements even in India. So if you look at, for example, what's unfortunately called the Bimaru states, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, you know, Rajasthan, those states have historically lagged the southern states, which is actually Kerala, Tamil Nadu have done the best. Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh also, including Telangana, are included in it, but I don't think they have done as well as Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So if you look at Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Kerala has a huge Muslim population. Because there's also this Hindu Muslim thing that people talk about all the time. If you look at the fertility rates in Kerala, actually, Hindus and Muslims are almost on par, and they have actually sub to which is replacement level, less than 2 kids per woman right now. If you look at this Bimaru and the northern belt, what I think of as a northern belt, the Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, they have right now they have a fertility rate of 3 children per woman. And so this is really has to do with the education levels in those states. It has nothing to do with how the people think, their culture or anything else, right? Or the religion. Really, it has to do with the education levels in those places, and it has fallen from independence to today at a slow pace, of course, because of the increasing levels of education. And of course, yeah, so this is not a Hindu Muslim divide in terms of birth rates. It is really a education divide.
Education divide, I think, is very important, and I'm very glad you are making this point, because in Pakistan, Punjab is the most developed, and we had students coming from Sindh who were saying in Sindh there are schools on paper, no, there are no teachers, nobody comes and teaches, and they think that Punjab is far ahead because at least there are regular schools and colleges. The same in the northwest frontier province or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Now I know many girls are going to school and college, and hopefully, because there the families are very very large, 10 children, 12 children in the northwest frontier.
Yeah, right,
But
right to
I
say.
think that rate will come down. When women get educated, I think that is the key. It's not just education, but how much of that education is directed towards women. I think that's the point.
Right, Isiagji. You're totally right. The reason is also, boys have always gotten better education.
That's
So if
correct.
you focus on girls' education, your boys' education also automatically improves.
That's correct. That's correct. That's
Right?
correct.
So I want to go back to the slide about life expectancy here. Just 1 second. Life expectancy. Yeah, this one. So if you really think in terms of in the big picture, what does life expectancy mean? It means that people are dying earlier than otherwise, right? That's what life expectancy means. If you have higher life expectancy, you're living longer. If you have
Hmm.
lower life expectancy, you're dying earlier. So if you look at the difference or excess mortality in technical terms, how many extra people are dying in a country because of you know because of history or social policy or whatever you want to call. In Pakistan, I have calculated that as of today, every year there are 3 lakh extra deaths, or 300,000. And in India, I've calculated that there are, in comparison with China, I'm only comparing with China. I'm not even comparing with the United States or South Korea. I'm just comparing with China, India and China, and India and China and Pakistan, and China and India, right? Just in comparison with China, we have 118 lakhs or 1.8 million excess deaths every year in India today. And in Pakistan, we have 300,000 or 3 lakh 20,000 extra deaths in Pakistan every year. So if you look at it from a for me personally, deaths, however they come, whether they come from war or somebody getting killed by criminals, or or rioting, or by by maternal mortality when a mother gives birth to her child, or because of infectious disease, everything, or because of lack of healthcare, or any other factor that you can think of, for me they are all the same, personally speaking. uh, so that is the excess mortality, and this one, this number actually blows out every other factor that is that we can think about. Like Ishtiaq Ahmed ji, I remember you saying in the great unfortunate conflict, when the partition happened, there are 1 million deaths, which is, but here today we have 300,000 dying in Pakistan every day, every year, sorry, not day, every
Every year,
year.
every
And in
year.
India 1.8 million. So and this has been happening for every year, uh, for the last 70 years. It's not that it has been 300,000, but maybe at independent it was 100,000, and in India maybe it was 500,000. It was definitely lesser at that time because the population was smaller, but
Population was
definitely
smaller. Yeah,
because
yeah,
of the population being smaller, but the actual number of deaths is actually extraordinarily high. And this is, I think, what we should concentrate as civil society, as people interested in human well-being all over the world. This is what we should concentrate on.
quite.
We can see the life expectancy in Bangladesh dipping down in the 70s. Now this must have been because of the civil war,
Yes,
and prior to the civil war, the cyclone Bhola also played a huge role. I think more than 500,000 people died in
right,
cyclone Bhola.
right,
Right, sir?
But Pakistan is below even Bangladesh
right
on this,
now. Yes,
or right now. So
Right now,
Pakistan is,
I'm
yes,
talking about the 70s. If you look at
yes,
if you
yes,
look at
correct,
1970
correct,
and see
correct.
Bangladesh, there is
Bilkul.
a huge dip in the life expectancy,
Yes, yes, correct.
and that's, I think, two reasons have contributed to it. The first one being Cyclone Bhola, and the second one is the civil war that happened.
Hmm.
right.
Hmm. Very interesting.
So yeah, so Pakistan unfortunately is lagging even behind Bangladesh right now.
Yeah.
Uh, that's an unfortunate story.
Hmm. S- So
Yeah,
are
life
we finished?
expectancy at the
Or,
moment is probably the lowest in Pakistan amongst all the countries that you see here.
yeah, life expectancy?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, lowest. And that's very disappointing because in the 60s, Pakistan had a family planning department, Ayub Khan's period was, I think, best in these ways. Family planning was officially supported, and there were health service given to the people because of the fundamentalism and so on. All that has been, given up, and so we can see the consequences.
And we
Right.
can see case of India that the life expectancy in the 60s was not that good as well.
Yeah, yeah.
That must have, yeah, socialist policies inherited by the state, probably have a lot to do with it. I don't know. Maybe.
Arvindji, I don't think it's useful to think about socialism, capitalism, Arvindji.
Okay.
Because as we discussed, the economy and income is not important. So I think I would, we should definitely critique the governments of India, and I would definitely critique Nehruji, who was our first prime minister. But I would also say it is unfortunately a continuation in Indian history. Even to the present day government, I don't see the government giving importance to education as it should. All through India's independence, the investment, or uh, as a percentage of GDP, India has only invested 3% of its GDP in education. The
and
internationally recommended level is 6%, 5 to 6% actually. And
and
all through
Pakistan, how much is Pakistan in?
Pakistan, I don't know, Ishtiaq Ahmed ji, sorry, but I assume it is around the same percentage.
No, no, below India, I think it's 1.3 or something.
Uh,
No,
I wouldn't
I
be
I
don't
can
know.
I
surprised.
I
can
don't
I
know.
can Google it.
I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised, Professor Ji. But in terms of India's development, neither the initial Prime Minister Nehru ji or the latest Prime Minister Modi ji, None of them have actually, or all the prime ministers who have come before, in between them, right?
2.51% of the GDP is spent by
2.1
Pakistan on education.
2.1%, I see. 2.1.
2.51.
Acha, 2.51. Okay.
Ji.
And India is 3%. Huh? It's slightly better.
Slightly better, but that is why we don't see India being leaps and bounds ahead of Pakistan.
And then, may I pose a question? Why are we in this subcontinent so much against people at the bottom getting education? Because uh, in India, they went for higher institutions, ITs, and so on. But education for the common people at the bottom of the social scale lagged behind. And
Yeah,
it's
this
the
is
same in Pakistan, it seems. What's wrong with us?
yeah.
I pose this question.
Unfortunately, this is true worldwide, Professor G.
Ji.
It has to. I think my opinion is that it has to do with who controls the government and who they think is important. So they invest in higher education more than education for the
And
masses.
I think because the caste system still somewhere in the mind is present. Who deserves to get educated and go ahead? Somewhere there must be this factor.
I think if you look at around the world, if you look at Argentina or if you look at Mali, Malawi, I think you'll find similar repeated patterns, Professor G. So that is why I think. I mean, I don't think caste system is only saying that there is the rich and there is everyone else. There's the masses. So I think it's
The
easier
basic
to
education is free for all, regardless of the caste.
where
But why
In
don't
in
people go?
in India,
in
no, no,
theory,
Uh,
in theory, Arvindji, I mean, it has been true that even in the at independence time, we had 8 years of schooling, up to 14 years age, schooling was free, supposed to be free. It's written into the Constitution of India. I'm
I
talking
see.
about the real implementation of the policy.
true.
Okay.
Is it possible to maybe generate a graph only on the South Asian countries?
Jay Shankar, can you help us here, please?
This is going to be interesting because Sri Lanka had almost 90% education in 1948.
I don't
So,
think it was that high, Professor G. But we will see. We will see what the. But it was
okay.
definitely higher. I totally understand that. Yeah.
So there is a problem with your theory then.
Mm. So mismanagement definitely hurts a country
Yes,
because
yes.
you can run a country into the ground.
Uh,
So
exactly.
you,
But the general argument is very strong, no
right.
doubt.
So
All other factors have to help. They have to be helping factors.
right. So maybe we can, once we come back into the presentation, I can talk a little bit about Cuba too,
Yeah.
because if you look at Cuba, we can look at its GDP, we can look at its life expectancy, and we can look at its education levels, and then we can try and draw some conclusions.
And I would say that China was also socialist oriented, but with a different ideology. So they went for higher education. Nehru's socialism still did not give emphasis to education at the lower level. So
Right.
there is a difference.
Right. So, Professor Ji, this is why I don't like isms, right? If you look at India, Kerala, for example, is also democratic. It was ruled by communists, but Tamil Nadu wasn't ruled by communists. But Tamil Nadu has done very well actually in
I
India.
see. Very
Right?
interesting.
The rest of the states of India are all democratic, right? Like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, every other of them are democratic. Now China, as you said, is not democratic, but South Korea actually South Korea had a mix. It was initially not democratic. It was ruled by a dictator, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
we cannot take these political systems and then like draw any conclusions. They are, in my opinion, totally useless, Professor G. Because
Well,
the thing
not
is, they don't inform the policies are the ones that are important. They don't really inform anything when
no,
we
but
use
I
this.
think ideology determines how education will be treated. Uh, South Korea seems to be um because Soviet Russia gave 100. Cuba has is another case of 100% literacy.
Right.
For them, literacy has been very important.
Right.
But because of the ideology, the development has not taken place the same way.
Economic development has not taken place. I want to
Yes.
clarify that.
Yes. Economic development. Right.
Economic
Right.
development.
Yeah.
So Jayashankar, are we ready? So let's start with the 6 years of schooling here again. So here we can see that Turkey, Turkey is ahead in 1960, and we also see that Sri Lanka is ahead, which is very important,
Exactly. That's what I said. Yeah.
right? So it has 55% literacy. I mean, 55% of its women were going to finishing 6 years of schooling in 1960. So let's keep looking. Myanmar actually is behind, is actually ahead of the south of Bangladesh, India,
And
interesting,
Pakistan.
and Pakistan. Okay, interesting. Keep going. So when we look at 9 years of schooling, we see that Turkey has been quite lagging, but over a period of time it has come up. But Sri Lanka was always ahead.
Sri Lanka. That's I
Yes.
remembered. Sri Lanka was an exception, and look at the politics what they have done to their country.
Yes. So
So-
let's go down again. Next slide, please. And here we find 12 years of schooling. We again find Sri Lanka to be better,
That's
and
right. Yeah.
Turkey
Yes.
to be behind, and India, Pakistan, Bangladesh to be behind as we look at it. So here let's take a pause and let's just guess what will be what the GDP levels will be, right? My guess is basically that Turkey is my knowledge is Turkey is higher than every other country in 1960,
Yes.
followed by maybe Sri Lanka, and then Pakistan, Bangladesh, India are kind of on par. Let's look at GDP right now.
Yep, that would be the most likely scenario.
So that's exactly what it is.
Yes.
Hmm.
Actually Sri Lanka was ahead of Turkey
Initially. Yeah.
That is very
And
interesting.
then
That is
we
life
see a
expectancy.
huge dip. And then we see a
No,
huge dip.
this is life expectancy. I was looking for GDP, Shankar. Sorry, let's look at GDP. Yeah. So GDP wise, yes. So GDP, Turkey is ahead of has continuously stayed ahead, because this is I think one of the reasons is because it has been on the periphery of Europe, right? And
No,
therefore there's a lot of
because of
trade.
because of Ataturk. Ataturk gave great importance to the welfare of women, gave them equal rights along with men, and education for women. He adopted two girls, orphan girls, and I think one became a pilot and one also distinguished in some field. So
Nice.
Ataturk established the model that the road to progress is education, and especially women's education. And I'm very happy you have done this for me, because this proves my point that the way the government allocates its resources to education makes a big difference.
Right. Exactly. So if you look here, next comes Sri Lanka actually. So Sri Lanka has always been ahead, right?
Yes.
And followed by the other South Asian countries, and of course Myanmar has been really poor.
Yeah.
So
Let's look at the life expectancy as well.
Yeah. So here we see Sri Lanka ahead because its education levels were high ahead, right?
Yeah. But then you see a sudden dip as well in the life expectancy. Now, this is between 2008 and 10 probably, and that's probably to do with the civil war that happened at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
The civil
So
war.
actually Sri Lanka is another very interesting country for me personally. The reason is, even no country with civil war actually has this kind of life expectancy. India, for example, or Pakistan or Bangladesh, if you take these countries that we are looking at here, even today have lesser life expectancy than Sri Lanka has. Sri Lanka suffered a brutal civil war, but still managed to have higher life expectancy. This is actually a contradiction. There has been no country on earth that has actually managed to have a civil war and have reasonable life expectancy. I'm not saying it's very high, but
still, because they started very well in 1948.
exactly, their education
No,
levels were so high, and therefore they could maintain and keep their life
that's
expectancy
right.
up.
That's exactly.
Right?
For
And that is why
example,
they have fallen behind actually Turkey, and I'm sure they have fallen behind China, they have fallen behind South Korea for sure. United States, they have always been behind, I would imagine. Uh,
Mm.
but this actually reinforces the importance of education actually. And
True.
Absolutely.
obviously, today we see a
If you see Sri Lanka, it sort of goes up until 2000s, and then there is a dip, and then a sudden dip again closer to 2008 and 10.
yeah.
So
I
that
think
is
there was a
probably to the Civil War.
yeah. I think that was the time when Prabhakaran and LTT were pretty much eliminated at that point.
Yeah.
Mm.
That is when Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the Rajapaksa, the family actually came to power because they were the ones instrumental in destroying LTTE, right? Uh, but yeah, the other interesting thing is, although we say Sri Lanka is in crisis, yes, it is in an economic crisis. Yes, the people are protesting, but if you look at the fundamental well-being of the people, I don't think you'll see a big dip, right? Where
Interesting.
life expectancy would not come and join India, for example, right?
Mm.
It may take a small dip, but without wars, it is unlikely to see a serious dip. It may stagnate for a few years. That is understandable because of the mismanagement of the economy. But Sri Lanka is not a basket case. Actually, it is done far better than India, and it has continues to do far better than India, right?
Mm.
Even today with its crisis.
Mm.
Yeah, the
That
only
is
thing is that Sri Lanka is not an export-led economy. The majority of the revenue that Sri Lanka normally gets is through tourism, and when one can see that in the last 2 to 3 years, it has taken a big hit due to COVID.
right, right. Right. And so, but I also want to look at college education for these countries,
Okay.
which is the last slide. So here we can see that Sri Lanka, yes, it has done. Yeah, it has 30% of its kids, girls in finished college, but it could have done so much more better, right?
Hmm.
So this is again, this we run into social policy again and again and again. We see this continuously, especially if you could contrast this with the previous presentation where we looked at South Korea, for example, and the other Asian tigers, uh, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, all of them have, or even Malaysia, Indonesia to some extent, not to this extent, but the four Asian tigers, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Malaysia and South Korea, are all have extraordinarily high levels of education. Actually, Singapore even beats out South Korea. In
So I think the important point today, and I'm very glad for this program, is that education is the key to overall well being.
right,
Yes. And it is the education that would drive the economy, not the other way around.
right,
So,
in the long run, yes,
In the long run, yes.
in the long
eh,
run. So
uh, can we discuss then what is education? How do you define education?
Professor G, the way I define education is that standard schooling. I'm not even focused so much on the quality of education, which is also another important aspect. And I wish personally that every child in the world has a quality education. But the fact that they stay in regular schools, right? I'm not talking about madrasas or Christian. If you look at the history of Christianity, if you look at Spain, for example, Spain we should all have been speaking Spanish. Why? Because they were the first conquerors of the world. They conquered the Americas, right? Spain and Portugal. They conquered South America, and they had a very strong. They started on a very strong footnote, and they could have conquered the world. The reason they failed in doing that is because they did not focus on their, for whatever reason, Catholic countries did not focus on education. So if you think about 1500, Martin Luther came up with this Protestant Reformation, which
Hmm.
was read really Ikra. This Professor G, which is Ikra is read, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
which is the first word in the Quran, right? And Martin Luther did the same thing. He said you should read the Bible on your own. Don't depend on the Catholic Church to teach you what is in the Bible. So to do that, he said you need to have education. I mean, basic literacy. So that is how we see in the history that we see we. I'm sure you've heard of the word Protestant work ethic. Protestants are hardworking and they have work ethic, whereas what that word even implies is that Catholics have no work ethic. They're dirty, illiterate, and all that negative
And
stereotypes come into play. I
and
mean, it is not
and
explicitly
and
said like that.
and unfortunately, the same is true of Muslims. what I have heard is that since the time of Islamization, no clerk, no person in the office is there at the prayer time. So people go away and don't come back, and nobody can do anything. So I agree with you.
So so
These things matter a lot. Yes.
so South America, if you look at it, why is it behind? You can see that they're mostly Catholic majority countries, like Argentina, for example, Haiti, for example, right? Dominican Republic. Most of them are Catholic countries, actually, due to the influence of the Catholic Church, really. Spain, Italy, all Catholic countries. They were all, in Europe also. You can see that the effects of education and the differential education rates actually led to differential rates of development.
But Krishna ji, Western education in the subcontinent, the best education one got was at Catholic English medium schools.
True.
That is true.
St. Xavier's in Bombay, in Delhi, I went to St. Anthony's High School, Lahore.
Me
So
too.
it depends, I think.
So we are talking about a historical timeline, Professor G. We are talking about a 500-year timeline, right? So by the time you and I mean, you're a little older than me, but when I went to college,
quite older than you.
but we are, in terms of century, we are the same century people, right? We are the 1900s people, right?
Yeah.
I'm really talking 1800, 1700, 1600, right?
That's correct.
Because British was Protestant,
Yes.
right? Their literacy level slowly, after the Protestant reform from Martin Luther, their literacy level started slowly going up. And
That's
that is why, even if you look at the United States, for example, there was in the 1850s, everyone started going to school, so primary school. In the 1920s, there was a big push for the high school movement, so which is finishing 12 years of education.
Another thing, in the subcontinent, when Western education, the British introduced education, the Hindus were first to take to it, and the Muslims lagged behind for about 70 to 90 years. And so the Hindus were ahead in all other sectors.
Right.
And this not only a majority. Yes.
Right. And this also explains why the population in Muslim population in India has gone up, Professor G. Because, and this is true in Pakistan too, right? You're talking about Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and, Balochistan and those provinces, right? Wherever you don't invest in education, their population will increase.
Right? That's correct. I agree.
And in India,
this is a very sound argument that you make, and we have all these graphs now to present.
Right.
The life expectancy is not that higher when, in those areas where education is not that high. And that is probably built into the psyche of the parents, that the more kids you have, chances are that 2 or 3 will actually survive to see the light of maybe 50 plus.
Right. So it is built into the culture that you need to have large number of kids, because historically, for the last 10,000 years, everyone, no matter Christian, Muslim, Hindu, have always had 6 kids, and 4 of them died, which is my first graph, right? So if you think in your own life, Arvind ji, or if you think in your own life, Ishtiaq ji, or in my own life, think of how many brothers and sisters we have, right? Think of how many brothers and sisters our parents had.
That is correct.
And think of how many brothers and sisters their grandparents had. You will it is not
to say,
it is not that
just imagining, the entire scenario is very frightening.
Yes.
Right? So basically, we have seen that in our own families, that the number of kids has gone down. The number of brothers and sisters, the number of kids a parent has, a family has gone down, via the generations. This has been true for Hindus, this has been true for Muslims, this has been true for all communities in India, and actually across the world. I'm not even talking India. This is true across the world. Right?
Across the world.
So if you find differences in terms of religion, it is not really difference because of the religion per se, but it is because of the different differentials in terms of education. And why that is a question that we can ask, right? There is no reason why Muslims in India should lag behind Hindus in terms of education today. It is really social policy, and this social policy is set by the government of India, right? Governments of India, the central government and the state government, right? So it is the governments of India that have to take responsibility for the mess that we are in.
Quite right.
I
and
guess
same for
one of the reasons why Muslims lag behind is probably to do with the laws, the personal laws that they have in the country. That is a barrier. It acts as a barrier, because a lot of clerics would say that this
I,
education is
I'm I'm
against the religious
I'm not
values.
convinced, Arvindji. The reason
Okay.
is,
Hmm.
on a in the short term, I would agree with you a little bit. Maybe there's some small effect, right? But if you look at it in the long run, right? Once you send your kid to 12th grade, right, or even 6th grade or 9th grade, it is automatic. See, if you look at your grandparents, they would have said to their children, why are you not having kids, right? In our families and in our generation, we definitely see married couples without kids, right? And there is pressure from the parents saying, why don't you have kids, it's all good, acha acha, you'll have somebody to play with. All that pressure is there, right? But that doesn't, at the end, it has only little effect, right? The fundamental thing is really, over the long run, is really how much education the government provides, really,
Very good. That's the point. I
right?
think that's the most important point is what the government is doing. Correct.
Right, because if you look at Cuba, for example, or if you look at Sri Lanka, if you look at any country, you can clearly see the effects. China, for example, they were not in the parents who are uneducated, did not know how to send their kids to school. It was really the government that came and said, send your kid to school, right?
Hmm.
And that is the important part. And
Same,
it
same
is
for Turkey. Same for
But
Turkey.
then government cannot force you. Now let me give you a counter argument to that.
that is true.
In 1830s, when the British introduced the new education policy in India, the Muslims they immediately resented it. It was the Hindus who said that yes, we are willing to send our kids to those schools and universities you have built, provided that you don't charge us for it because we don't have enough money. So as a result of it, so the policies that took place in 1830s, if you compare that, by the time of 1870s, less than 1% Muslims were part of the public service.
Right,
And that is because almost 8,000 ulemas in Bengal issued a joint fatwa against the Western education system.
So, and if you go back into history,
Today,
Arunji, you will find similar kinds of things in the Hindu system also. Among
yes,
Hindu, among Hindu, among Hindu elite, however you want to talk about them, religious authorities, they were against Westernization. Even today, we hear echoes of it.
Raja
Having lived in
Ram
the West
Mohan
for
Roy
50
is the
years,
man who
huh?
broke the barriers for Hindus. Raja Ram
Right.
Mohan Roy, and he was opposed by the Orthodox Hindus, by the way.
Right. If you look at the Hindu personal code, B.R. Ambedkar, who actually championed it through the parliament, was very unhappy with Nehru because he got no support from Nehru or from the MPs parliament. He was very unhappy with it. The Orthodox Hindus at that point, and all of them were Orthodox at that point, really, the MPs were really opposed to the Hindu personal code. So it is a process of change. The old ways of thinking are always there in every religion, right?
That's
The
correct.
process of modernization will run into the resistance from them. What what the government can do is just really get into the don't really rile them up. Just let them be what they are. Let them talk about whatever they want to talk about. Just put your kids through school, and you don't even need to teach them, tell them secular values or anything. You just teach them regular math, science, some history, some geography, and when they grow up, the advantage with education is they can now read. Once they read, they can understand the world and they can form their own opinions. Really, the world has changed by people forming their own opinions. It is not the government telling you to do this, or the religious authorities, no matter the religion, right? Eventually people form their own can form their own opinions if they are educated. No, there is resistance, I understand, but over a 70-year period there is not that much resistance, right? If you say this year there is a little bit resistance, I understand, but over a 70-year period that is not true.
But there is one problem, when we come to education. I know many, uh, at least Pakistanis. I had a personal experience when I was teaching at LUMS, and I had issued some statement that I was glad that at this institution, boys and girls can sit together and talk. And the next day, five of these professors came. Will you believe it? Two of them had been to Harvard. One was a Yale fellow. One was MIT,
Ah,
and another one some business school. The top-notch American schools, and they were Orthodox Muslims, uh, who did something professional, but in their own ideology or thinking, they were so conservative that you can't imagine. So
right,
it depends. It matters a lot. What
right
sort of
is
education, what mind the education produces is important.
definitely Ishtiaq, it is important. What I will say there is, for girls' education especially, right? Uh, the educated girls that I was talking about earlier, they ran into girls who are named Naraz Nath. The whole family was naraz, angry, unhappy, disappointed, right? When the child came, so the girl was named like that, and there was another girl was named Antim Bala. We don't want any more girls. You are the Antim Bala.
Aha, acha, acha,
This is,
acha.
you can know from the names that they are Hindu names,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Mm.
So this is today's India, right? This is less than 10 years, 10 years, right? So if you so when that is the case, and when you hear the stories, why are you not sending the girls to school, they tell, "Oh, bhag jayegi, she will run away." We are talking about primary school and maybe ninth grade, right? We are not even talking high school here. But they're so afraid, they're so conservative, so because this is really a fundamental change in their life, right? Their parents have never been educated. You look at the last 100 generations, they've never been educated. You're telling them to do fundamentally something different, there'll be some resistance, and it's okay. I mean, I don't judge them, right?
Okay, yeah.
And also, there is a big controversy in India about hijab. I've heard your comments, Isiak ji, on YouTube. My take is, girls are so kept in a box. Let them
Hmm.
wear what they want. They're not like bringing a knife to school, right? They only want to wear a dress. Let them wear. Like, like, imagine the other side. Some schools in India enforce skirts because, you know imagine that girl who's named Antim Bala. Imagine for trying to force her to wear skirts. She will never go to school. You
Mm.
cannot enforce dress codes that are so outside the norm of a community that they will pull the girls out of school. It's
I
okay,
completely agree with you on that.
right? So
That was my take as well.
if you force girls to wear skirts, even a lot of Hindu girls will drop out, right? We don't force that, right? We have to look at what is socially acceptable, and then, okay, we have to make some minor adjustments. I'm not saying make fundamental adjustment. Make some
Okay.
minor adjustments to it, which is not a problem, right? The thing
Change
is,
change is a gradual process. You don't,
It's a
force.
gradual process. It's a cumulative process.
that too, right?
Cumulative.
So if these girls who are wearing hijab, if you let them into school, they in their later life may decide hijab is not for me, right? Or their kids will be better educated than them can decide on their own. But if you keep this kid out of school, then neither will they
Yes,
decide, because they're in a patriarchal, conservative society. Now they don't have an outlet at all.
I tell you this. I was teaching uh, MPhil classes. I've taken Arvind to one of my classes as well. And I
Mm.
talked to the girls that when you come to the university, you are wearing a burqa and everything. Here you take it off. What's the reason? And they said, look, in our localities, if we don't have this, we are not free to come to the university. But here in the campus, we are secure, so we take it off. So I agree with you. Partly some want them, others are forced to use
Right.
them. But let them come to the classes. This is important.
Right,
They
right, right.
should come to the
And
classes.
then maybe later in life they may have the opportunity if they go to work, or
Yes,
may or may
yes,
not, right? But
yes.
definitely every generation will be better able to make their choices.
Right.
I think it would be great if we could have a session where we can bring some students from India and Pakistan and then try and have this conversation. Also, if it would be nice if we could do a comparison between the southern and the northern states of India.
The difficulty I have, Arvindji, is I don't have graphs like this,
Okay.
right? But if you want to talk about fertility rates, for example, I can speak of the from the from the top of my head. So in Andhra Pradesh, 2006, combined Andhra Pradesh, including Telangana, 2006 was the year when the fertility rate dropped to 2.1, which is the replacement level. So if you have
Mhm.
2.1 women kids on average per woman, your population will in the long run be stable, fixed, right? So it happened in 2006. In Tamil Nadu, it happened in 2002 or a little bit earlier, if 3 4
What
years.
about the Muslims in these areas, in these two?
The Muslims will lag a little bit behind
Well,
ICRG,
like, okay,
little bit behind, like 15
little
years
bit.
behind, right? That is why I was asking you to think about your parents and your grandparents' generation, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But right now I see, I grew up in a slum area. Actually, my dad was a doctor, so I grew up in a good nice house, but we lived in the slums of my hometown, right?
Okay.
The girls that used to see when I was growing up and the younger generation are very different. They were all
They are.
uneducated, and this used to be half Muslim and half Hindu.
Hmm.
So I saw a lot of Muslim women. I and my I've seen a tremendous change in the area. Like the younger generation is all fully educated. They've gone to school. Some of them have gone to college, and they're almost like me. I would say somewhat, right? Their outlook, the number of kids they have, everything is same. But if your parents, if you did not have that education, then your fertility would be a little bit higher.
That's correct. That's
But
correct.
and this is true, and Kerala true. This is true.
Hmm.
Hindus got education first, and so they, if you look at the history of Kerala in terms of population, I can share that very easily.
Mhm.
Give me 1 second.
Also, an interesting factor to note amongst the uneducated people having more children is that they often work in, in labor kind of jobs in farms or in factories and all, and they think that the more kids you have, there are going to be, your chances of having, a good sort of livelihood is much better, because then you'll have much more people who are going to go out and get some sort of revenue back home.
Right, that is
And
entirely
and
correct.
and in another factor which complicates it is not only that they want children, they want a son. Everybody's running after a son.
I think the
And so
educated youth, I think the educated youth today is moving away from this notion of,
educated
but,
youth is the exception. I mean,
hmm,
people still are under pressure. I had a cousin, a very poor man, who
mhm.
had 9 daughters and then finally got a son. And then he stopped having more children. So that's it. So that's another factor.
So this discrimination against that we see against girl children is there in across the world again, Ishtiaq ji, Professor ji.
That's true. That's true.
And so if you look at, for example, South Korea, South
Yeah.
Korea was lagging behind for women. It was lagging behind, right? But eventually it caught up, and once it caught up, actually it stabilizes. So basically, the first step is the hard step, really, right? And here we can see how fast in this tab we can see how fast Muslim growth was happening in so different demographics were growing in the state of Kerala. We can see
Okay.
that Muslims, the decadal growth was high,
Okay.
right? But for Hindus, the decadal growth rate is actually lower, has always been lower than Muslims here, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
but you can clearly see that, from in 1971 the decadal growth rate was 37% for Muslims. That was the highest ever,
Okay.
right? Now if you look in 2011, it is only 12%.
So it's declining. That's good, because I keep hearing from hardcore Hindus that not even in Kerala the Muslims are, But this is all nonsense. When you bring these graphs and facts, then people have to shut up. So this is going to be a very important
Right.
program for us. This is intellectual. This is stimulating people to think. Just not informing them, but to think on their own what to do. So
Very true.
I think we should all aim for forcing our countries to spend more on education. This is the main point, I think.
Absolutely.
So I want to, I mean, whether it is part of the program or not, it's fine. But I just wanted to show something
Yeah.
here. Give me 1 second. So this is South Korea. Republic of Korea is South Korea. We are not talking about North
Okay.
Korea. So over the last, so in 2020, almost right now, this is how Korea actually used to. This is the older age group. The from top to down is older to younger. Okay. So the y-axis is oldest is at the top, and the x-axis there is male on the left and female on the right for each particular graph. The left-hand side graph is India. The right-hand side graph is South Korea. Okay.
Okay.
Now we can see how fast South Korea has improved its education levels, and we can also see the discrimination that South Korean girls and women faced when they were growing up.
Okay.
Right, because in the older age groups, more there was more illiteracy and less education for women here.
Yeah.
Right, for India also this is true. Women actually have less education. Even today this is true. Right,
True.
but
Yeah.
what you see as in the younger age groups for South Korea, it totally disappears.
That's interesting.
True.
South Korea then is a very impressive case. Very
Right.
impressive case.
So this is, if you educate Professor Ji, the discrimination falls apart. Right, if you imagine in our own lives, right, your family, you would have discriminated much less against girl children than boy children in your own family, or your siblings. Right, your parents would have discriminated more, your grandparents would have discriminated even more. Right, so even in our own family we can see that change in how much discrimination decreases with generation to generation. And this is because of the education. I'm not saying discrimination is totally gone. I think it still exists, but it is decreased to a great extent.
Decreasing. It is decreasing. Okay.
So if you take a look at 1950, for example, both India and Korea, this is how Korea used to be in 1950.
Oh, I see. I see.
So we can see that, we can clearly see the discrimination against girls in that time period. In India also we can see it. And if we maybe we can go to a map, and maybe this is a better way to look at it. I will do percentage basis because percentage is easier to think about. This is how education has changed over the period in these countries. Really. So India has shown very slow growth, and this is overall population. The male and female is not segregated here, but this is how it has overall changed in these two countries, India and South Korea.
Okay.
Right, and the same corresponding data for 1950 is this. We can go to, for example, 1980. Let me take 1980. This is how they changed. And Singapore will look very similar to Korea. Taiwan will look very similar. Hong Kong will look very similar. And China will look a little bit better than India, but worse than South Korea.
True.
That's all I have for you, Arvind ji, and that's all I have for you, Ishtiaq ji.
Thank you so much, Krishna ji, for this presentation. I hope people are going to watch it. We have really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to have you. And also, I would like to thank Jai Shankar ji as well to help us in the background. I think without him, it wouldn't have been possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jai Shankar. Thank you, Professor ji.
And Professor Sahab, thank you so much for joining at these odd hours. I know it's not that easy, but still,
No,
thanks.
I think this was a privilege to take part in this, because all my life I have believed that education is the key forward. But that has been a general sort of understanding. Now we have solid data and graphs to show this. So this is an excellent uh, material in hand that we can now go out and share with the public. So thank you very much, Krishna Pagadala and Jaya Shankar ji, and of course Arvind, you and I are always willing to take part in these things. Very nice experience of this uh, program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think it would be great, friends, if you could please subscribe to Krishna ji's channel. We all look forward to viewing his channel as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ji. Yeah.
All the best.